When my nephew's daughter got married last spring, I drove 4 hours from Memphis to Atlanta in my old Chevy Silverado. I had a gift wrapped in brown paper sitting on the passenger seat, a hand-stitched quilt I had spent 3 months making, square by square, using fabric from every city I had ever worked in: Chicago linen, New Orleans cotton, Detroit wool. My granddaughter Aaliyah loved quilt. She had slept under one I made her when she was 7 years old, and she had called me 2 weeks before the wedding, crying happy tears, telling me she wanted that quilt on the bed in her new home. So, I drove 4 hours. And when I arrived at the venue, a plantation-style event hall outside of Buckhead, the man at the entrance gate looked me up and down, took in my pressed slacks and my clean work shirt, glanced at my truck, and said, "Sir, this entrance is for invited guests only. Family and wedding party are checking in at the main house. Vendors and deliveries go around back." I stood there holding a handmade quilt. He thought I was a delivery man. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I smiled, nodded, walked back to my truck, and made one phone call. Not to Aaliyah, not to her mother. I called my attorney. 15 minutes later, the catering contract, the florist, the DJ, the entire vendor package I had quietly paid for in full, all of it went into legal dispute hold. Every service provider received a payment flag simultaneously. The music inside stopped first. I am Walter Gaines. I am 64 years old. For 38 years, I ran a commercial construction company out of Memphis, Tennessee. We built hospitals, school buildings, government housing projects, and more church fellowship halls than I can count. I started that company with $1,400, a used pickup truck, and a contractor's license. I studied for 6 months to pass. I built it into a firm with 200 employees and contracts in 11 states. But if you looked at me today, and most people do, then look right past me, you would never know it. I don't wear my success on my body. I wear flannels and work boots out of habit, not poverty. I drive a truck because I trust trucks. I keep my accounts quiet because I learned a long time ago that the second people know what you have, they stop seeing who you are. They only see what they can take. My nephew's name is Darnell. He is 41, smooth-talking, and has been living a lifestyle that does not match his income for as long as I can remember. His wife, Tanya, is the kind of woman who treats every family gathering like an audition for a lifestyle she saw in a magazine. Together, they have spent the last decade building a reputation on borrowed money and other people's silence. Aaliyah is their daughter. She is 26, sweet-tempered, and the only person at that wedding who still treats me like family and not like a footnote. She had called me herself to invite me. She had given me the date, the address, the time. She had said, "Uncle Walter, I need you there." I was there. The man at the gate just didn't know who he was, turning away. I sat in my truck for 12 minutes. I watched the venue through the windshield. The lights inside were golden. I could see the silhouettes of people dancing through the tall windows. I could see Darnell near the bar, laughing, wearing a tuxedo that still had the rental tag on the sleeve. I could see Tanya holding a champagne flute, working the room like a politician at a fundraiser. And somewhere inside, I knew Aaliyah was looking toward the door. I pulled out my phone. I dialed Gerald Webb, my attorney of 22 years. Gerald answered on the second ring. "Walter, what happened?" "I need you to place a payment dispute on the Buckhead venue package. Everything under the Gaines event account. I'm Osk." There was a pause. Gerald had worked with me long enough to know that when I used that particular calm voice, something had gone wrong. All of it? All of it. Flag it as unauthorized charges. I didn't authorize a single payment without my name on the final approval. "Walter, that will freeze the vendors mid-event." "I know," I said. "Do it." He did it. I watched the windows. The dancing shadows kept moving for about 8 minutes. Then they slowed. Then the lights inside shifted. Then I saw Darnell put his phone to his ear. And even from the parking lot, I could see the way his body changed. The confidence left him like air leaving a balloon. He put the phone down. He put it back to his ear. He looked at the bar. He looked at the DJ booth. He looked at the entrance to the kitchen. The music stopped. I put my truck in park, adjusted my shirt collar, and walked back to the gate. The same man was still standing there. He looked at me differently this time. He wasn't sure why. I believe, I said quietly, that the family is expecting me now. He stepped aside. I walked through the door. The morning after the wedding, I sat at the kitchen table in my Memphis home, drinking black coffee and waiting. I didn't have to wait long. Darnell called at 7:45 in the morning. I let it ring. He called again at 8. I answered. Uncle Walter. His voice had that particular texture. I recognized the layer of forced calm over pure panic. We need to talk about what happened last night. Good morning, Darnell. The vendors are saying there's a payment dispute on the account. The venue is threatening to bill us directly for the overtime, and the florist is saying she can't release the deposits. Tanya is losing her mind. What did you do? I protected my investment, I said. Same as I always do. It was my daughter's wedding. It was, I agreed. And I paid for it. Every single contract under that venue package came out of an account I set up specifically for this event. Which means when your man at the gate sent me around back like I was delivering flowers, he was turning away the person who funded the entire evening. Silence. That was a misunderstanding, Darnell said. Which part? He didn't answer that. I want to sit down with you, I said, face to face, this week. Uncle Walter, I don't think that's this week, Darnell. I'll come to you. He agreed because he had no choice. The payment dispute was still active. Gerald had made sure of that. 3 days later, I drove to Atlanta, not to Darnell's house, to his office. He worked as a regional sales manager for a mid-level real estate firm. The kind of office where appearance mattered more than performance. I wore my good suit, the charcoal one I had worn to close the contract on a $40 million hospital project in Nashville 12 years ago. I walked in and asked for Darnell Gaines. The receptionist looked at me the way people always look at me the first time. Then I gave her my card. She looked at the card. She looked at me. She picked up the phone a little faster. Darnell came out looking polished, but rattled underneath it. The way a man looks when he's been preparing for a conversation he doesn't want to have. We sat in a conference room. He offered me water. I declined. I need to understand something, I told him. I've been putting money into your family's life for 11 years. Aaliyah's private school tuition, the down payment on your house, Tanya's mother's medical bills, your car loan when the dealership wouldn't approve you, and then at your daughter's wedding, which I paid for entirely, the man you hired treated me like I came to fix the air conditioning. Darnell shifted in his seat. I didn't tell him to do that. You told him to direct vendors around back. You told him the family entrance was for... I paused and let him finish it in his head. You built a guest list that reflected the image you wanted to project, and I didn't fit the image. I think of that. That's not fair. It's accurate, I said. What I want to know is how far this goes. He looked at the table. What do you mean? I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folded document. I slid it across the conference table. It was a payment summary I had put together with Gerald, a careful chronological record of every transfer I had made into accounts connected to Darnell and Tanya over the past 11 years. The total at the bottom was $237,000. Darnell stared at the number like it was a crime scene. I'm not asking for that money back, I said. I gave it freely. But I am telling you that the dispute hold stays active until I understand what's been happening with Aaliyah's education account. He looked up. What about it? I set up a fund 18 months ago, $25,000, designated for Aaliyah and Marcus to put toward their first home purchase. I made it conditional the funds would release upon marriage, which happened Saturday. I instructed my bank to trigger the release this week. I paused. Gerald tells me the account shows a withdrawal of $12,000 made 8 months ago, before the marriage, on your signature. The room went very quiet. Darnell was still looking at the table. His jaw had tightened into something I recognized as shame, trying to hold itself together. It was a temporary borrow, he said, and his voice had dropped to almost nothing. I was going to put it back. From where? He didn't answer. Darnell? I kept my voice level. Even, not angry, something quieter than anger. You took money out of your daughter's wedding fund, before her wedding, to cover something you didn't want Tanya to know about, and then you had your guests treated like the problem was mine. He put his face in his hands. I gave him 30 seconds. Then I said, I need to know where it went. It took him another week, and 2 more meetings with Gerald present, before the full picture came out. The $12,000 hadn't gone to a debt or a bill. It had gone to an investment, a private equity group that 3 of Darnell's colleagues had brought to him over a weekend golf trip. He had put the money in without telling Tanya, expecting a return by the end of the quarter. The group had stopped responding to emails in February. The money was gone. He had been trying to replace it quietly ever since, which is why the wedding budget had quietly shifted from the account I'd funded to a credit line Tanya didn't fully understand. Which is why the vendors had been stretched. Which is why half the things Tanya had promised Aaliyah for the reception had been quietly downgraded or cut. Aaliyah didn't know any of it. She thought her parents had managed everything beautifully. The night I found out the full truth, I sat in my Memphis living room in the old recliner that had shaped itself around me over 20 years. On the side table was a glass of sweet tea and my Bible, neither of which I touched. I just sat in the dark, thinking about Aaliyah's face when she had called me. I need you there, she had said. She had needed me. And her father had taken the floor out from under her without her ever knowing she'd been standing on borrowed ground. I wasn't going to explode. I am 64 years old. I have built too much to spend my energy exploding. But I was not going to let this continue quietly. I called Marcus, Aaliyah's new husband. They were still on their honeymoon in Savannah. I didn't burden him with everything. I just told him that when they returned, I would like to meet with him and Aaliyah together, and that there were some financial matters related to the wedding gift account that needed their attention. I told him not to mention the call to Darnell or Tanya. He said, "Yes, sir, Uncle Walter." Good kid. Accountant. Steady. I had approved of him from the first time they introduced him, not because of his profession, but because of the way he listened when other people spoke. You can learn everything you need to know about a man by watching whether he listens or just waits to talk. While I waited for them to return, I made 2 other calls. The first was to a woman named Carla Dupree. Carla was a forensic financial consultant I had used twice before in my construction business, when I suspected a subcontractor was double billing. She was methodical, discreet, and had the kind of mind that could trace a dollar bill through 15 accounts and bring it back to the source. I asked her to look into the private equity group that had taken Darnell's money. I asked her to find out if it was a legitimate bad investment or something worse. The second call was to a man named Reverend Aldous Simmons. Reverend Simmons had been the pastor of our family church in Memphis for 31 years. He had baptized Darnell. He had married Darnell and Tanya. He had given the blessing at the wedding Saturday. He was one of the 3 people in the world who could talk to Darnell without Darnell shutting down into defensiveness. I wasn't asking Reverend Simmons to intervene. I was asking him to pray and to be available. Carla came back to me in 4 days. The private equity group was not a legitimate investment gone wrong. It was a structured fraud, a small, sophisticated operation that had been targeting black professionals in the Atlanta metro area, specifically, working through golf courses and business networks, collecting initial deposits from credible-seeming members, and then disappearing before the structure collapsed under its own weight. Darnell was one of at least 20 victims, most of whom hadn't reported it because they were too ashamed to tell their wives or their accountants. The total known take was over $600,000. I read Carla's report twice. Then I did something that surprised even me. I felt sorry for Darnell. Not enough to let it go, but enough to understand that the man who had allowed me to be turned away at a gate was not a villain. He was a frightened person drowning in a lie he didn't know how to climb out of. That understanding did not change what I needed to do. But it changed how I planned to do it. When Aaliyah and Marcus returned from Savannah, I drove back to Atlanta. I took them to dinner at a restaurant I had eaten at many times over the years. Quiet, not fancy, a family-owned soul food place in the West End that had been serving the same recipes since 1971. We ordered. We talked about the honeymoon. I watched them together and felt the kind of peace that comes from knowing you've done at least one thing right in your life. Because this young woman was kind and grounded, and she had chosen someone who deserved her. After the food came, I told them, not everything at once. I told them about the fund. I told them about the $12,000. I told them about Carla's report. I slid a copy of the report across the table, a summary version, 2 pages, clear and readable. Aaliyah was quiet for a long time. Marcus read the report carefully. He was still in accountant mode, even at dinner, which I respected. "Does Mama know?" Aaliyah asked. "I don't believe so," I said. She folded her napkin very carefully, a gesture so much like her grandmother's that it stopped my breath for a second. "What do you want to do, Uncle Walter?" "I want to give you and Marcus the full $25,000 regardless," I said. "That's already done. Gerald processed it this week. That money is yours. What happened to the $12,000 is a separate matter between me and your father. You're not going to just let it go," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "But I'm not going to destroy him either. What I am going to do is make sure he tells your mother the truth, and I'm going to help him report what happened to the appropriate authorities, because there are at least 19 other families who lost money to the same people, and they deserve justice too." Marcus looked at me steadily. "And if he won't cooperate?" I picked up my fork. "Then I'll make sure the financial institutions that hold his accounts receive Carla's report. They tend to have questions when they learn that account funds moved through channels connected to a known fraud scheme." Aaliyah looked at the table. Then she looked at me. "You are not what people think you are, Uncle Walter." "I know," I said. "I'm counting on that." What happened next took 2 weeks and was not dramatic in the way people imagine these things are dramatic. There was no confrontation with screaming. There were no threats issued in parking lots. There was a meeting Darnell, Tanya, Reverend Simmons, Gerald, and me in Reverend Simmons' study at the church on a Tuesday afternoon. Darnell had not wanted to come. Tanya definitely had not wanted to come. But Reverend Simmons had called them both personally, and there are people in your life whose calls you simply answer. He is one of those people. Tanya walked in looking armored. She sat with her purse on her lap, and her chin elevated, and her eyes moving around the room, assessing threats. She looked at me the way she had always looked at me, like I was a problem she had tolerated for the sake of Darnell's side of the family. Then Gerald opened his folder and started reading numbers. By the time he finished the summary, the missing $12,000, the fraud scheme, the full accounting of what had moved through their joint accounts over the past 3 years, Tanya's chin was no longer elevated. She was sitting very still, her hands flat on her thighs, and she was looking at her husband with an expression I recognized as the moment when a lie becomes visible to the person it was told to. Darnell didn't try to explain. He sat with his head slightly bowed and let the numbers speak, because there was nothing he could say that would change what they were. Reverend Simmons spoke last. He didn't speak about money. He spoke about what happens to a man when he lets shame drive his decisions. He spoke about the difference between a mistake and a pattern. He spoke quietly, the way he always speaks, and the room held every word. I watched Tanya during that part. I watched something shift in her. Not toward me. I don't think Tanya will ever fully warm to me, and I have made my peace with that, but toward reality. That shift is all I had asked for. By the end of the meeting, 3 things had been agreed upon. Darnell would file a formal report with the Georgia Securities Division regarding the fraud scheme, which Gerald would help him prepare. Darnell would set up automatic monthly transfers from his salary into a restitution account. I would manage not for my benefit, but to rebuild whatever trust had eroded with the vendors and contacts who had been affected by the wedding payment dispute. And Tanya would sit down with a financial counselor, not because she had done anything wrong, but because nobody should walk through a 30-year marriage without understanding where the money goes. It wasn't everything, but it was honest. And honesty, in my experience, is where things start to get rebuilt. The payment dispute was released the following Monday. The vendors were paid in full. The florist kept her deposit. The DJ sent me a thank you note, which I thought was unusual but appreciated. 6 weeks after the wedding, on a Saturday afternoon in early summer, I drove back up to Atlanta one more time. Not for a meeting, not for a negotiation. Aaliyah had called me and said she and Marcus were having a housewarming small. Just family, just food. Come when you want and stay as long as you like. I brought the quilt. The house was a 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood just east of the city. Small yard, good bones, a porch with 2 rocking chairs, the kind of house that looks like someone intends to stay. Aaliyah answered the door before I knocked. She had a dish towel over one shoulder and flour on her forearm, and she looked more like her grandmother than I had ever seen her look. She hugged me with both arms and said, "I am so glad you're here, Uncle Walter." I handed her the quilt. She unfolded it right there in the doorway, holding it up, looking at the squares. Chicago, New Orleans, Detroit. "How long did this take you?" she asked. 3 months, I said. "Started it the day you called and told me about the wedding." She folded it against her chest and didn't say anything for a moment. Inside, Marcus shook my hand and pulled me toward the kitchen. Darnell was standing near the sliding glass door to the backyard. He looked thinner than he had at the wedding. He looked like a man who had spent several weeks sleeping badly and thinking hard, which is often what honesty costs you in the short term. He looked at me when I came in. He didn't look away. "Uncle Walter," he said. "Darnell." We stood there for a moment. There were things between us that hadn't been said and probably wouldn't be said at a housewarming party. That was all right. There is a kind of understanding between people who have been through something that doesn't require a full vocabulary. He extended his hand. I shook it. Tanya was there too, near the food, and she nodded at me once, a nod that cost her something, and I could see that it did, and I nodded back with the same weight. I stepped out to the backyard, where the afternoon sun was still warm. There were children running in the grass, neighbors I hadn't met, the smell of something good coming off a grill in the corner. Reverend Simmons was there, holding a paper plate and telling a story that was making 2 younger men laugh. Marcus's mother was there, a tall, quiet woman who shook my hand and said she had heard a great deal about me. I told her I hoped it was mostly accurate. I found a lawn chair under a big oak tree at the far end of the yard. I sat down. Someone brought me a plate without being asked: ribs, potato salad, cornbread, and set a glass of sweet tea next to it, and I ate and watched the yard fill up with noise and warmth and ordinary life. The quilt was probably already on the bed upstairs. People ask me sometimes, people who know some version of what happened, why I didn't just pull back completely, why I didn't take my money, close the accounts, and let Darnell and Tanya live with the consequences of how they had treated me. And I understand the question. Part of me sat in that parking lot wanting exactly that. Part of me still lives in the memory of standing in a suit next to a handmade quilt while a stranger pointed me toward the service entrance. But here is what I know after 64 years. You cannot protect the people you love by burning the house down. You can only protect them by knowing which walls are load-bearing and which ones are just decoration. Darnell was decoration for a long time: performance, image, borrowed confidence, but underneath that, he was still the boy I'd watched grow up in our family's kitchen in Memphis. He was still Aaliyah's father. And Aaliyah deserved a father who had been made to face himself, not a father who had been simply destroyed. Accountability is not the same as punishment. I wanted Darnell accountable. I wanted the truth on the table. I wanted Aaliyah and Marcus protected. All of that happened. The rest, the healing, the rebuilding, the slow work of becoming trustworthy, that is not my job. That is his. I finished my plate. The sun was lower now, cutting long gold lines across the grass. Leo ran past my chair, chasing a bigger kid, laughing so hard he could barely run straight. I watched him and thought about my wife, Evelyn, gone 11 years now. She had always said that the reason we built things was so our children would have somewhere safe to stand. I had spent 38 years building structures. Hospitals, schools, housing. And at the end of it, what I had left that mattered wasn't in any of those buildings. It was here, in this backyard, in that quilt, on that bed upstairs. In Aaliyah saying, "I needed you there," and meaning it. Reverend Simmons came and sat in the empty chair beside me. He didn't say anything for a while. We watched the yard. "You did all right, Walter," he said finally. I picked up my sweet tea. "I stayed out of my own way," I said. "That's the hardest part." He laughed quietly. "It always is." The evening came in slow and warm. People drifted toward the porch, toward the food, toward each other. I stayed in my chair under the oak tree until the fireflies came out, which in Georgia, in early summer, happens just past 9 o'clock, and I watched them for a while before I got up and said my goodbyes. Aaliyah walked me to my truck. She had the quilt over her arm, carrying it back outside for some reason I didn't ask about. "I'm putting it in the guest room," she said, as if I had asked. "So, it's the first thing people see when they come stay with us. because I want them to know where we come from. I opened the truck door. You know what Grandma Evelyn used to say, Aaliyah said. I looked at her. She said the measure of a man isn't how he acts when he's winning. It's how he acts when he's been disrespected and has the power to make it worse. I nodded. She said that to me on our wedding night, I told her. I've been trying to live up to it ever since. I got in the truck. Aaliyah stepped back and waved, holding the quilt, the porch light catching the colors Chicago, New Orleans, Detroit, and I backed out of the driveway and pointed the Silverado south toward Memphis. The road was long and dark, and I drove it steady, both hands on the wheel, the way I have always driven. Not fast, not reckless, just forward, just home. I am Walter Gaines. I am a father and a great-uncle and a grandfather in all the ways that count. I am a builder. I built my company from $1,400, and I built my family from the same raw material. Work and patience and the refusal to let anyone tell me I don't belong in a room I helped construct. If you are listening tonight, and you know what it feels like to be pointed toward the back entrance of something you built, I want you to hear this. Don't argue at the gate. Don't make a scene. Walk back to your vehicle, take a breath, and make the call. The real power was never in the door. It was always in you. Where are you listening from tonight? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. Real power doesn't announce itself at the front door. It simply knows which walls it built. Walter never needed anyone's permission to belong, and neither do you. When someone tries to measure your worth by your truck or your work shirt, remember that the quietest person in the room is often holding the deed. Do your work, protect your people, and never mistake your silence for weakness, because the right ones never will. A small note for you: this story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of entertainment while leaving something worth carrying with you long after the last word.